Welcome everyone to BigTent USA. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Kitty Douglas, and I'm delighted to host today's discussion with our partner, Vote Forward. At BigTent USA, we put democracy above partisanship. We're a national women-led voter coalition dedicated to protecting democracy, protecting women's reproductive freedom, and the future of our children and grandchildren. We do this through education and civic engagement. One of our efforts is through letter writing with Vote Forward. And so we've got a link in the chat where you can request letters, but I wanted to turn the call over to my fellow board member at BigTent, Tracy Craighead, who's found a great way to engage her friends and family in letter writing. So Tracy, take it away, please.
Great. Thanks, Kitty. Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm a very active BigTent member and a very active letter writer. Historically, I've written them by myself, watching the news or a movie or something. But as my own anxiety level has started to rise, I decided I wanted to do more. And so I reached out to a kind of like-minded friend, and we decided to co-host a letter writing party because we knew we had a lot of friends like us who wanted to do more than just wring our hands. And we decided to have this action, oriented event. So what we did was we invited just about 20 people, men and women, to my friend's house for dinner. That did make it a bit easier for me. And we sent out an email saying that we were going to write these letters, and we directed them to our link through BigTent to Vote Forward. And we had set out a goal of writing 400 letters or more for the evening. Since we didn't really know how many people we were going to have, it was kind of hard to set a goal, but we knew we wanted to have some structure for the event. And then we also asked them to come with a minimum of 40 letters already printed out. And that was really the main direction. And with that, on the night, we had I think we had 14 people. We had 10 women and 4 men. And I have to add that one of the men surprisingly came without his wife, but that's how committed he was to the cause. So that was really nice to see. And I think in terms of the logistics, what was interesting and that what worked for us is that we had set a window from 6 to 9 in the evening. And, we made it very fluid so people could come for as much time as they could. And we had a few people who stayed for less than an hour. So they really kind of power wrote during that time. The other thing that we did was we just, made sure we had enough tables and chairs and things for people, but we also put out, colored markers and pens for people to choose from. We banded little batches of envelopes together, 20 at a time. And so that made things easier. And we also printed out extra copies of our list that we gotten and the letters from Vote Forward. So we had them all scattered around should people need them. And that all worked well. We also had great music playing. One of my co-hosts' husband put together a fun playlist. That was great, but we turned it off when we had BigTent come on because it worked out very neatly. We coincided with a BigTent discussion, the one that some of you may have attended a couple of weeks ago with Sarah Longwell and Judy Woodruff. So we had that going on in the background, which actually was really great because one, it was an introduction to some people to BigTent, but it also had this very serious conversation going on while we're writing these letters. So it really gave us kind of more purpose and a sense of urgency as we wrote. And it also spawned great conversation after the BigTent went off. One other thing that we did that was kind of fun and made it all kind of added to this sense of teamwork and camaraderie is we had a little cowbell, and on the bell we wrote, "Get out the vote." And then every time someone finished their batch of letters, they rang the bell, we all applauded, and then we had a count going on a big chalkboard. So people would get up and write the number of letters they had finished. It was all great. And the idea was, again, to have a sense of community, to connect with a purpose, and all be action-oriented. In the end, we wrote 477 letters, so we were really thrilled, and that was exciting. And then as a follow-up, the next day, I wrote a thank you note for everyone who attended, and also recounted how many letters we finished with, and also included photographs. And I have to say, I publicly announced that I personally was going to be responsible for trying to see our getting out 10,000 letters. So that was my goal, to say that we'd get that kind of, get some commitment there. And I asked people who were in the email exchange if they'd be willing to step up and help. And a number of people have, and we are now strategizing about more events and how we want to go about doing this. And I just want to add, one point that our window is 3 hours. I think anyone who wants to do this, you don't need to do it that long. I think an hour and a half, 2 hours is fine. You don't need to have it in your own home. You certainly don't need to have dinner. We did provide dinner. But I really think just going to some public place, a library, a church, an office, just get it going. And I think the surprise takeaway is how much fun everyone has doing it and feeling like you're with you're not alone and you're with people who you feel safe with and you can talk to openly about what's going on. So anyway, that's what I've got. And I look forward to hearing more of what the folks from Vote Forward have to say, because we all know this really does make an impact. And, we have a lot of letters to get to write. So get writing. Thanks.
Thank you, Tracy. That was really inspiring. And I also think it's anxiety reducing too, to be with your friends and be productive that way. So thank you. And we do have some great events coming up. So if you want to organize a party around our events, take a look on our website. But our upcoming speakers include tomorrow evening, Brian Stelter and Angelo Corsoni, Lauren Grow-Wargo and Dr. Carol Anderson, Norm Eisen and George Conway, Barbara McQuaid, and Kimberly Atkins Store, to name a few. The links are to sign up are in the chat. Okay, a few housekeeping items. We have the Q&A disabled, but the chat is open. So please add your questions in for Yasmin, and I'll try to get to as many as I can. And we will be sending out a recap that will have all the links in it with the recording, a podcast, a Substack, which you can share with your friends as well. I am so thrilled to introduce Yasmin Radjy. Yasmin is the executive director of Swing Left and Vote Forward, whose innovative letter writing tactic has enabled more than 250,000 volunteers to encourage citizens in underrepresented communities to vote. Previously, Yasmin served in the Biden-Harris administration as senior advisor for the Recovery Program Outreach at the U.S. Department of the Treasury, National Political Director at Planned Parenthood Action Fund, PPAF, Director of Organizing and Training at PPAF and Planned Parenthood Federation of America, the Virginia State Director at Mobilize America in 2017, and co-founder of Resistance School. So with that, I'm going to turn the call over to Yasmin. Thank you so much. Yasmin just had her second baby, so we're really grateful that she's back in action, working on behalf of democracy. And so thank you, Yasmin.
Thank you so much, Kitty. It is a pleasure to be with you all. And thanks, Tracy, for some amazing grounding stories about your letter writing up front. And thank you all for all that you've done. We're going to be spotlighting some of the work that you've already done here. As Kitty mentioned up front, this is actually my first official engagement since coming back from maternity leave last week. So I'm really, really proud to be here. What better way to kick things off in the return back and to sprint forward towards a very, very important election cycle. Want to thank my colleague, Nick, who is managing our slides, and going to request that Nick move us to the next slide, where I'd also like to introduce you to my amazing colleague. Many of you all have already met Emily. She runs all things data and research at Vote Forward, comes out of the hard sciences. We are tremendously lucky to have her. I'm going to quickly turn it over to Emily to introduce herself, and then we're going to tag team throughout this presentation, and of course, both be available for questions at the end. So Emily, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Hi, folks. I'm Emily. Pronouns are she, her. I'm the Senior Data and Research Director at Vote Forward, and I've been with the team since 2020. So I've made it through one presidential cycle already. I think I can survive this one. I'm really excited to see what we can do this year. And I'm already seeing some questions coming in the chat about things data and research related. So I'm definitely excited to get to your questions at the end of the presentation. But I have also played a big role in setting up the campaigns for this year. And so I'm happy to talk to y'all about our strategy, how we choose voters, where we get our data from, all of that fun stuff. And just to echo what Yasmin has been saying already, we are so grateful for all of you and the work that you put in, because none of this happens without you. So thank you for powering this work and being in it with us.
Thank you, Emily. And if we can go to the next slide, please. Kitty already provided a great introduction of Vote Forward, but for those of you for whom this is a new organization that you're learning about for the first time, We are a 501c4 organization. We also do some 501c3 work, which we're going to be talking about here today. All of that is boring tax ways of saying we are nonpartisan. So we are in good company here with the nonpartisan work that you all do. But our North Star is making sure that underrepresented voters all across the country, particularly in tipping point states and tipping point districts, have the opportunity to vote and are encouraged to vote through our partially handwritten letters, which we're going to be going into much more detail about today. And the reason why letters is this incredibly analog tactic has so much effect is because, as we all know, and we're going to get into, voters are getting contacted via text, via lots of annoying emails, via all sorts of different tactics. And the more personal handwritten these letters are, the more impactful they have been since our very beginning. And core to Vote Forward's raison d'etre from the very beginning has been to test every kind of letter outreach that we are doing. And we'll talk a little bit about how we do that. And the reason why we think that's so important is because you all have lots that you could be spending your time on, lots that could be sort of animating the way that you engage with the election cycle. We want to make sure that volunteers' time is going towards the most impactful ways to reaching those voters and getting them to turn out to vote in most cases. And we'll also talk about some voter registration letters that are newer to the Vote Forward outreach. If we can go to the next slide, please. Like I mentioned, this is what a letter looks like. You can print them from home. While we are an analog tactic in the sense that we are writing these letters with pen and paper, we are very tech forward. We think it's really important for volunteers such as yourselves, such as our college volunteers, so many people around the country, to be able to download those letters from home. All that anyone needs is the ability to access the internet, to download letters, whether it's a few, a couple dozen, whether it's a few hundred, and just be able to print them from home. Folks who don't have printers, we will mail them what we call letter kits and give them stamps and printed letters so that they're able to write these letters even if they don't have access to a printer or can't afford postage. And the core of what makes these really, really impactful is that the letters are heartfelt, are specific, are authentic, and compelling. In just a few short sentences, each of our volunteers, so many of you all, are sharing why voting really matters. And then we vary the way in which those specific, authentic, and compelling messages manifest in these letters. Some of them are general, some of them about why voting matters, some of them are issue specific. And so we have different, we call letter writing campaigns, where we are testing those specific, authentic, and compelling messages with slightly different flavors across what we are really trying to do, the ways that we are trying to experiment on the maximal way we can get someone to turn out to vote, depending on what motivates them. We'll talk more about what that means. So we can go to the next slide. I'm sure many of the folks on the line today have engaged in a whole host of tactics, ranging from knocking on doors to sending text to voters, making phone calls to voters. And if we can click so we can see, we sort of put things on the spectrum of there are some very easy tactics that, as we heard up front from Tracy, we can do from the pleasure of our own home with friends or others. Texting is one of those, also phone banking. These are really, really easy. And unfortunately, they are also lower in impact than some of the sort of tougher to do things, such as in-person canvassing, where for folks like myself, I live in Washington, D.C., for me to get to a swing district, which I like to do as often as possible during an election cycle, takes me about 90 minutes to get there. Then it's probably a 2-3 hour commitment to go knock on doors. So we're talking about a full day commitment, which I can't do on a Wednesday evening from my own home. But those are really, really impactful tactics, knocking on doors, even as voter outreach becomes less and less salient every year. Canvassing remains incredibly impactful. We just can't do it 7 days a week for most of us, and it takes more of a commitment. Handwritten letters for us are in that sort of sweet spot. They are easier to do than going out and driving to knock on doors, but they are more impactful than some of the lowest lift tactics like phone banking and text banking. And so this is not to sort of compare tactics. We each have different preferences. Some of us are introverts and extroverts. We also live in very different geographies. And we see handwritten letters as a really key tactic for folks to integrate into the slate of things that they do in order to drive impact. And it is certainly not a low effort activity, but is lower effort than some other things. And we'll talk about, Emily's going to talk in a moment about the measurement that we have around its impact, which we test every single time we do a letter writing experiment to make sure that if it diminishes an impact at any time, we are innovating in new ways to change the course. So with that, I'm going to kick it to Emily to talk to us a little bit about how we do measure impact, which is what she does every single day.
Yes. Okay, great. So this is going to be your one slide overview of how randomized controlled trials work. And for some of you, this is going to be a radical oversimplification. But for some of you, it's going to be like, I've never seen this before in my life. My goal is that no matter which category you fall into or somewhere in between, this will at least give you a flavor of how we do that thing that Yasmin was just talking about, which is measuring impact. So we run randomized controlled trials, which are seen as the gold standard of measuring impact in political work, as well as in many other fields, such as medical research. And the idea here is that we have a group of voters and we want to reach them with letters, but we also want to measure how impactful those letters are. So what we're going to do is split them randomly into two groups, our control group that doesn't get letters typically, and a treatment group that is going to get letters. And then we compare turnout across those groups. And remember, those groups were randomly assigned, right? So overall, they're similar in almost every way. But the only key difference between those groups is that some of them did get our letters and the others didn't. After the letter campaign ends, we get data on which voters turned out. And I'll also say this is like hard data. This comes from secretaries of state. Some of you may know that while who you vote for is private, whether or not you vote is public. And that's the public data that we use to measure our success. So once we receive that data, we can compare those turnout levels across the groups. And any difference that we see, because we've assigned the voters to groups in this way, we can be very sure that any difference we see is because of the letters. So this is an extremely rigorous way to measure impact. And we actually do this not just like once in a while, but in almost every letter campaign that we do. So for us, this is not something that is like a one and done thing. Okay, great, we measured something, let's move on. We try to get signal on almost everything we do because we know that it can change over time. We know that these impacts can look different in different contexts, different elections. And also because we want to keep kind of pushing the boundaries of the tactic to see how we can make it even better, which requires constant testing and constant improvement. So I know this is kind of a lot for one slide. I'm already seeing some questions in the chat about data and research work and about impact. So that's something I'm definitely happy to speak to at the end. We can move to the next slide. And I know that for a lot of us, right, when we do these things, it's not just enough to know that, okay, somebody's measuring impact somewhere. You really want to feel confident that what you're doing is actually making a difference in the world. And I know that sometimes when we see these effect sizes, it can be like, wow, like we did all this work and it's only like 0.5 percentage point or 1 percentage point or a couple percentage points of impact. That seems really small, right? But I do want to put that in its proper context because even those tiny effect sizes at scale can have huge electoral implications. And not for partisan reasons, but just to illustrate this, I love to put this image on this slide because as we know, the difference in Georgia in 2020 in the presidential election came down to just a few thousand votes. And again, this year, it's forecast that just a few thousand voters are going to be the ones that likely decide the results of the election. And so what that means is that, you know, if we're targeting these groups of voters, shifting them by even, say, 0.5 percentage point, as in this example, if we do that at scale, that could be tens of thousands of votes that change. And that's enough to make a big difference in our electoral outcomes. So this year, we are focused on boosting turnout as high as possible in close elections where we think that just a few thousand votes could make a difference, because we think that those elections will be decided on tight margins. And Yasmin is going to talk to you much more about the strategy and the thinking behind how we're doing that. But I just want to give you some confidence that, you know, even if it seems like each individual letter is only having a small impact, when we do it together and we do it at scale in close elections, it really does make a difference.
Thank you, Emily. And if we can go to the next slide, I'm seeing so many great questions in the chat. I'm hoping we cover a few of them, and then of course we'll get into more in the Q&A. Something that's really important to us and has been from the beginning of Vote Forward's existence is building a culture of democracy. You all embody the idea that this is not a partisan issue. Our democracy is fractured, and we need to strengthen it in every way we can. And for us, building a lasting culture of democratic participation is at our core. And that goes for both volunteers and for voters, right? We are targeting voters, knowing that when we encourage someone to vote and they take that action, they are more likely to vote in future elections. That is core to the strengthening of our democracy. But also we know that each of us has a role to play beyond voting as people who care about the future of our country, and for people to just build into their muscle the actions that are so essential to making sure every election is stronger than the next. That is core to who we are, and that is for people who are new to the political process, as well as people who are seasoned activists who are going to spend their weekends knocking on doors, who are used to donating to causes and candidates. And one story from this past cycle is that one of our youngest activists, who is a high school junior, we have younger ones in Vote Forward, but a high school junior who set a goal for herself to write 1,000 letters. She has already hit that goal, so she has now shifted her stake to starting to host letter writing parties, much like what Tracy was talking about, to make sure that her friends are also learning about how they too can be a part of the process. So we see that culture of democratic participation as essential, starting from people in their sort of youngest years of action, all the way to folks, again, who are who've been taking action for years and years. And with this easy to do high impact tactic, we see that as core to who we are. So we can go to the next slide. I want to talk, before we get to the scale of what we're doing, the kind of principles of every election since we started in 2017 has been very, very different. We have not wavered from three core principles, even as our experiments have varied. Number one is we really believe that, as Emily does and her data and research team does every day, that evidence-driven tactics are essential. We don't want to waste people's time. We also, in tipping point elections, don't want to use sort of tactics that aren't going to actually help move the needle in terms of driving turnout around people who need that extra nudge. So we're constantly doing research and publishing the data when we run an experiment that is unsuccessful, so that folks know, even though we sort of took them on a journey of a tactic that we thought would be really impactful, if it didn't work, we also want to transparently let them know, both so the ecosystem can adjust and other organizations can learn from things that didn't go well for us, but also so that folks know when we're taking them on their next journey that we've integrated the learnings of what both worked and didn't work in our past letter writing tactics. We also, very core to who we are is a belief in collaboration, not competition. There are a lot of great tactics and a lot of great organizations across the ecosystem that are doing work that we will never be able to do alone. This is partners like you all. You all have been some of our strongest partners for years now. It's also because we are a nonpartisan organization, we work together with partners in the corporate space. Patagonia has been one of our partners. The Milwaukee Bucks basketball team has been one of our partners. And then, of course, a whole host of organizations like League of Conservation Voters, like a lot of the big political organizations that want to make sure that their volunteers and activists are doing something high impact. They also partner together with us along the way. And I've just had a sandwich delivered in my background. Apologies. The third is impact at scale. So we want to drive impact. We also really want to make sure that we are doing things at a big enough scale to actually move the needle in the elections that matters most. So we write letters to millions of voters, both in the on years or the even years of midterm and presidential election years, also in the odd years around special elections, like the 2 special elections in Ohio last year, in odd year elections like in Virginia. And we tend to see our odd year elections as the times where we innovate and our even years as the times when we scale up. Those have sort of blended together because of how important those odd year elections have ended up being and innovation. So we've sort of blended together both innovation and scale sort of year in and year out across the work that we do. We can go to the next slide, just to give you a sense of that scale. Since Vote Forward was founded in 2017, we, together with our partners and volunteers around the country, have written 31 million letters. That is tremendous scale. And because of letters being a tactic that folks could do even in the peak of COVID isolation, that scale did not go away in 2020. 2020, we actually wrote 26 million letters all across the country. So pretty incredible stuff. If we can go to the, sorry, 20 million. We raised $26 million, but we wrote 20 million letters. On the next slide, we are aiming to write 10 million letters in 2024. Part of the reason why that's a sort of a smaller amount than what we did in 2020 is because life is so different now than in 2020. We thought we would set an ambitious but realistic goal, and we are well on our way to blow through that goal thanks to the amazing work of folks like yourselves. And so as long as folks continue writing these letters at the rate that they currently are, that you all currently are, we think that we're going to be able to exceed this goal. And that is essential, as we'll get into as we talk about our targeting, given the scale of how many voters we need to make sure we're turning out in key states to protect our democracy. We can go to the next slide. I feel like this is the embodiment of everything that Tracy covered up front, which is we're talking about impact because we care about the future of our democracy and all the issues that are at stake. But writing letters is also really fun, whether you are an introvert or an extrovert, writing letters from home alone in silence with some music in the background, or whether you're having a letter writing party. Some of our most famous letter writing party hosts are Kira Sedgwick and Kevin Bacon, who you may have seen on MSNBC talking about this just a couple of months ago. But they, with their daughter, host letter writing parties with their friends with very little fanfare and very little limelight. They describe it as essential, not just because it's really fun. They pour quite a bit of wine during their letter writing parties, but also because, you know, in the doom scrolling of reading, we were just talking before this call started about the recent Siena New York Times polls, what we see in the news, what we see on television can feel so heavy, and writing letters is a way that in those moments of doom, in those moments of sort of paralysis around what's at stake, writing letters, whether together with others or individually, is a great way to invest in our own sort of sanity and mental health. We have a great volunteer who talks about how she feels like the impact that she's having on others is as significant as the impact it's having for herself when she feels really stressed out about all that's happening across our country. And here you can see some of those letter writing parties are huge, some are really small. And again, plenty of people do this tactic alone. Now, going to the next slide, just want to highlight our progress to date. We have already had 1.3 million letters adopted. We are well on our way to exceed that 10 million goal. And what we mean by adopted is someone might say, you know, I'm going to download 10 letters that I'm going to write by the end of the week. We don't know necessarily that they've written all of those 10 letters, but they then update on our website once those letters are in the mail. And we hold on having people put those letters in the mail until later in the cycle. So we track adoption throughout the cycle. And then at the end of the cycle, once people have confirmed whether they put those letters in the mail or not, we can see how many from the adopted letters were actually written and mailed. And we are in a really, really strong position. I think a testament to the enthusiasm about making sure this is a high turnout election. You all have been a huge part of that. You have already adopted 15,000 letters and counting. For those of you who've not yet been a part of that, we are excited to work together with you all and hopefully bring you onto the journey of this really fun and impactful tactic. Now, I saw somewhere in the chat some questions about who we're targeting, right? So we've talked about scale, we've talked about impact. Now, who in this particular election, and this varies, as we've said, different experiments at different moments, our sort of big bet for the cycle is targeting surge voters. And this goes to what I talked about before of there are a lot of people who are going to be reaching out to different kinds of voters, and all of that is going to really matter. For us, we want to make sure with the limited time and the sort of limited energy that we collectively have in our days, we are going to the people who are going to be the most likely with an intervention to turn out to vote and to turn out to vote in favor of democracy. So what does a surge voter mean? There's about 5 to 6 million, or there's about 7 to 8 million surge voters, or people who did not turn out in 2016, but have turned out to an election or multiple elections ever since 2016. So 2018, 2020, and 2022 have been the highest turnout elections in a century. You can see on the graph on the side, on the right side of the slide, what the past century of voter turnout has looked like. We are in a very high turnout time. And if in 2024, those surge voters, or those people who showed up basically in response to the election of Donald Trump, in these high surge voter elections, if they come back and they don't stay on the sofa this year, they come out to vote, this is going to be once again an incredibly high turnout election, and we will be able to win in both ballot measures and in sort of elections up and down the ballot in a pro-democracy platform. Now, I mentioned there's about 7 to 8 million of those surge voters. About 5 to 6 million of those folks have addresses that we can write letters to. So in our 10 million goal, about 5 to 6 million of those are people that we are going to be targeting for turnout letters. We are also, and we can talk about this more later, doing some voter registration. So this is our big bet. We also need to expand how many people, young people, folks who may have moved, to make sure that they are registering and turning out as well. So we're also, in addition to these 5 to 6 million surge voters, going to be doing some voter registration outreach. But I think this is the concept that we want to make sure all of us who care about tipping point races is really, really familiar with tracking who are these folks. And these are folks who tend to be younger, tend to be more racially and ethnically diverse than the average voter. And how do we motivate them to show up? And if they do show up, they tend to vote in favor of democracy, because again, these are folks who were motivated after Donald Trump's election in 2016. If we can go to the next slide, this is the map of who we are currently looking at. This map could, of course, change if things shift in the electorate, but these are probably pretty familiar states. 8 of these states are the sort of traditional presidential battlegrounds, places like Pennsylvania, places like Michigan and Wisconsin. We all watch these late at night on election night and are used to sort of what counties are familiar for tipping points within them. These are 8 states that are not just essential for the presidential, but many of them also have key Senate races. Pennsylvania, of course, Michigan, of course, Wisconsin. They also have what we call nested races below them, key House races, key state level races. Places like North Carolina also have a big governor's race on the ballot, New Hampshire as well. So 8 of the states that you see on here, again, are those kind of typical presidential, but also nested target races where a surge voter who comes out for president in Pennsylvania is hopefully also going to vote all the way down the ballot. There's also some states on here that are more unusual for a presidential year. So Montana and Ohio are 2 critical tipping point states in terms of who is going to control the US Senate. Those are not going to be places that the Biden campaign is going to invest $1. They are probably not also places that the Trump campaign is going to invest very much in. They're so red for the top of the ballot, but what happens down ballot is going to be critical for the balance of power in terms of the US Senate. California and New York are also really critical states here that will be essential in determining the balance of power for the US House. It is, I think it's 8 states that we're currently targeting in New York, and 8 districts in New York and California that are absolutely critical to who is going to be in charge of the US House next year and who is going to be speaker. So all of this adds up to 12 states that we're really focused on. And if we can go to the next slide, Emily can talk about the letter campaigns that we are using to target those folks.
Yes. Okay. So hopefully you've been hearing Yasmin say all this stuff and you're just so excited to write letters to voters in all of these key states. And the good news is that you already can, even though it's still pretty early in the 2024 cycle, even though for us, it already feels like it's taken forever. We're still early in the year. And we already have get out the vote letters to those surge voters in key states as well as congressional districts. And so if you go to voteforward.org/campaigns, we'll make sure to share that link with you in the chat and through various other channels. You can go ahead and start adopting voters, downloading those letters and writing them right now. I saw somebody mention this in the chat. It's a great point. In most cases, we are asking you to hold on to these letters until later. And that's because we think that these letters will be more impactful if they reach voters closer to election day when they are making their choices. The reality is that many of these voters are just like not even tuned into politics right now. A lot of people won't start tuning in until after Labor Day or even later. And so we are going to time our letters to reach them at the point when they're like really thinking about elections and voting decisions. There are also some new campaigns that we've just released and some that are coming out very soon that I'm excited to tell you about. So one is a very innovative thing for us. We're sending letters to US voters who are living abroad. That campaign just became active in the last couple of weeks. And what's unique about those letters is those ones you can send right away. So if you're somebody who's like, I just do not have the mental bandwidth right now to like hold on to a stack of letters for 6 months, that's actually okay. You can adopt these letters to US voters abroad and send them right now. It's clearly indicated on the campaign and on your letter bundle. The reason that we're excited to go after those voters is because they are an extremely under-contacted population. So everything that we do with a US voter who is living overseas will be extra impactful because we may be the only piece of election mail that they receive this entire cycle, or we might be one of just a handful. So we really have an opportunity to make a big difference with them. And also what's unique about US voters living abroad is that they have to send an absentee ballot request form quite early in the year in order to get their ballot and be eligible to vote in November. So right now we are sending letters to them to encourage them to file those ballot requests so that they can actually vote later in the year. And those letters are also including forms so that these voters have the option, they can do it online or they can do it through the paper form. And we're hoping that that will just increase their ability to request their ballots even more. That one's active, but we have a couple of exciting expansions coming soon. So Yasmin did speak to voter registration. We are excited about voter registration. We have sort of experimented with voter registration at a smaller scale in the past, but this year we really want to double down on it. So coming very soon, there will be letters for voter registration. And again, because those letters are not as time sensitive, you can already register to vote at any point in the year. Those will be letters that you can send at any time. So they're a great fit for you if you just want to write some letters and drop them in the mail right away. Then we're also going to be expanding our Get Out the Vote universe. So letters to Ohio and Montana will be coming soon. Those are states that have key Senate races. I can also say, although I didn't write it on this slide, that there will be Get Out the Vote letters to congressional districts outside of California and New York later in the year. I saw somebody ask about that, so wanted to speak to it. Basically, at this point, we are going to try and reach every voter that we can in every election that we think is going to make a big difference. And so it's likely that this universe will continue to expand. My experience in 2020 was that we were just so bowled over by the incredible volunteer energy that was out there. Like the appetite that people had to write letters just knocked our socks off. And so we were scrambling later in the year to just like come up, like to stand up the campaigns to meet that incredible energy. And so this year we are planning more in advance such that we are, when that surge comes, when people, and I know as volunteer organizers, you're going to get people that come on like October 1st and they're like, I haven't been thinking about the election all year, but now I want to do something. We are planning for that and we will have something for you and them to do. Okay, so how you can help. Obviously, as I was just saying, you can totally write letters with Vote Forward. So it's easy. You can sign up on our website, voteforward.org. Again, we'll make sure to share this in the chat, follow-up emails, all sorts of different ways. We actually have humans review your application. And so it takes we try to do it in the same day. Sometimes it takes the next day. But we have some amazing volunteers that actually review every single person who signs up to make sure that you are in fact a real human being, and we're not just sending our letters to bots or something like that. And then once you sign up, you'll be able to choose any campaign from our website and go ahead and download your own letters. And of course, you can also then, if you want to, share those with your friends, your family, coworkers, neighbors, your pets, anybody that is an ally for you in the fight to save democracy is welcome. You can also, if you want to even take the next step, host them for letter writing parties. So in 2020, this was a thing that many people couldn't do because a lot of us were stuck in our homes due to the pandemic. So we're extra excited this year to lean into the social aspect of letter writing and to encourage folks, if they want to get together. This is really also part of that culture of democracy piece that Yasmin spoke to earlier, that when we get together, either virtually like this or physically in the same space and do things that have impact, we are not only having an impact on elections through voters, we are building a strong culture of democracy and civic engagement amongst ourselves. So letter writing parties are a great way to do that. And then, of course, also our programs and our subsidies to letter writers do take money to support. So if you would like to directly donate to support them, we do have an ActBlue page, and we can share that with you as well. To speak to the subsidies really quickly, we know that for some folks, the cost of stamps or other materials might be a barrier, especially folks like, say, college students who they might have a lot of time to write letters, but they're not exactly rolling in cash. And so for folks like that, we do have a way to help them by subsidizing their stamps and materials. And you can donate directly to that so that you can help out your fellow letter writers as well, if you're in a position to do so. And that's what we've got. We are so appreciative. Thank you so much for listening to Yasmin and to me. And I'm already seeing a lot of amazing, really energetic questions coming in through the chat. So I'm sure we should, you're excited to move into the Q&A. But thank you all so much again.
Great. Thanks, Emily, and thanks, Yasmin. I'm going to pull some great questions from the chat so we can get started. There were a few questions about the difference between postcarding and letter writing. So I think it's it's helpful to unpack why you focus on letters, and which you did mention, but I think it's worth repeating why you structure your letter that way, because people will get it and be like, oh, this is interesting, but tell us why, because you've done the work on that.
Yes. The first thing I'll say is that we are not like enemies of postcard writing. I think this is sometimes a little bit of an illusion that we have to dispel. Like Yasmin said, we're all about collaboration over competition. So we see all of these different tactics as part of a larger aligned movement that is trying to have the most impact possible. And through that lens, it's actually a good thing that we do different tactics, because there will be voters that respond to a postcard more than they respond to a letter, or vice versa. There will be voters who maybe they get a postcard, maybe they get a letter. Now they're thinking a little bit about the election, but the thing that really puts them over the top is when that canvasser comes and knocks on their door, right? So we really see this as truly like a suite of tactics, and anything that works should be included in that suite. So I'll just say that up front. What I have seen in general is that the evidence base for postcards shows, in general, a slightly lower effect size per postcard versus letters. However, I know that postcard postage is also a little bit cheaper. So in terms of the cost effectiveness, often it sort of might wash out. But I also want to speak to thinking of these two tactics also and realizing that they're a little bit different, right? So a postcard is something that is identifiable right away. There are advantages to that because the voter who receives it can immediately look at it and start reading it. But the advantage of a letter, by comparison, is that there is more of a surprise factor. So people see the handwritten envelope and they go, what's this? It's not even immediately identifiable as a piece of political mail. It looks like it's something that's coming from a real person, because it is. And so you have that sort of surprise factor, you have the curiosity factor. It feels very personal. It looks like something that might have come from your friend or your family member. And also, I saw some questions about this as well. The envelope itself can become a carrier for more content. So a postcard, it's just one thing. There's only so much you can fit on it. A letter with an envelope, you can put things like, say, that ballot request form that I noted. You can put things in the letter that make it even more impactful. And that's something that we'd like to double down on this year as well. So again, overall, I think the takeaway is, if you like to write postcards more than letters, we certainly are not going to discourage you from doing so. We think it's great that there are many organizations in the movement doing many things. But we also stand by our letters. We think they're a unique tactic that really fills this sweet spot in the overall toolbox. And so if you like writing letters, please do, and know that there's a strong evidence base for them.
So a couple of questions about your issue letters, specifically. Well, two things. One is you did talk about reaching young voters. How are you getting those names and addresses? I have two under 25-year-old voters. One of them cannot vote he goes to Colorado, he goes to CU, can't vote there. He's got to get an absentee ballot. Like, they are tricky. So tell us how you're getting those names, and then would love to hear a little bit about your issue work.
I can kick off and then Emily can fill in any gaps. So voters are motivated by different things, right? And so as we've run different experiments, in our earliest experiments, we did not do issue-specific messaging. It was about sort of how do you sort of in a personal and compelling way talk about the importance of voting. And then also, as Emily has alluded to, tested things like the timing of the letters, how much of the letter is handwritten, et cetera, et cetera. In recent cycles, we also wanted to see, again, in a nonpartisan way, are there some folks who we could target who may be more motivated based on a message that's focused on reproductive freedom, on environmental justice, or on gun violence prevention? And we've run sort of specific issue experiments, both independently, but also in partnership with organizations that have expertise around messaging in those areas. So we've partnered in the Virginia election this past cycle in 2023. We partnered together with Planned Parenthood Advocates of Virginia, March for Our Lives, the sort of youth-led anti-gun violence movement, and then also with League of Conservation Voters on climate messaging. Emily can talk a little bit about sort of what we've learned. I think the kind of headline is we are really, really intrigued by issue-focused messaging. We've also had some sort of strange results there that we're not exactly sort of sure what to draw from. So Emily should talk about some specifics there. But then the last thing that I'll just say in terms of targeting is the way that we're able to, for our turnout experiments, we're able to figure out who we want to reach, who these surge voters are, is we have all of the information about who votes in an election is publicly available information. So not just us, but the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, all the major organizations doing any kind of voter turnout can find out someone's name, address, gender, age. All of that is information. We can't obviously see who someone voted for. We still have secret ballots. That's a part of our constitutional rights as in this thriving democracy, hopefully more thriving soon. But we can see sort of who's turning out, and Emily can talk a little bit more about sort of how that then goes into our analysis. But that's why when we talk about surge voters as those folks who were animated to vote in 2018, 2020, and or 2022, those are folks who are younger, right? Some of them were not eligible to vote in 2016. They just recently turned 18 in the past couple of elections. But also it's a lot of millennial voters who still have not sort of formed that habit. We all know from voting patterns that older voters are much more reliable in terms of turnout in midterm years and off years and in low turnout elections. So our voter universe really does tilt younger, and again, is not exclusively young, but that is kind of who that surge voter demographic is. But Emily, I don't know if you want to talk about some of the issue-specific learnings we've had.
Yeah, I totally can. And everything you said about the voter data also is totally right. So good job. That is indeed how we actually find these youth voters. So when it comes to issue-specific messaging in our letters, as Yasmin mentioned, we've had sort of a mixed pattern of results. We've seen a little bit of evidence that maybe it's better than just, giving you total latitude over your messaging. We've seen some evidence that, okay, maybe it doesn't matter. We actually, because this evidence was so mixed, we did another round of experimentation in the Virginia elections last year with youth voters. And so we now have that data back, and it's just waiting on me and my wonderful research colleague to find the time to analyze it. So we're hoping that based on those research findings, we're going to be able to figure out whether or not that makes sense to do again this year. And just to give you a flavor of that, the issues that we tested last year in Virginia were gun violence prevention, climate and environment, and reproductive freedom. So issues that we know are very much on voters' minds, very much connected to the stakes of these elections. And also specifically for young voters, these are things that really are impacting them right now and will have a huge impact on their futures. So it's definitely still on our radar. And as always, we want to do this in a very evidence-driven way. And so we're waiting to see what the data tells us about that. The other thing I'll say, just because we had an interesting chat conversation that maybe not everybody saw about this, is when we think of issues, we're really thinking of ways to find an issue where you as a letter writer can come up with that story that is specific, authentic, and compelling. And in that way, find a sort of point of similarity between you and the recipient, right? And for that reason, we actually encourage folks not to be hyper specific in how they talk about an issue. So for example, one example we often like to use is that maybe the recipient doesn't agree with you about the Green New Deal, right? So maybe it's not a good idea to mention this specific policy, but the value of, seeing, say, the effects of climate change around you, or wanting a healthy, safe environment for you and your kids, those are things that, regardless of your specific life circumstances, people can connect to and that you can make a story around. And so that's why we encourage folks to sort of lean away from mentioning bills or specific policies and more towards those values and those issues.
Yeah, that's a good point. I wrote letters to Virginia voters in last year, gosh. And that was what I sort of, it was a broad swath of like, I want everyone to be able to have healthcare to protect, their family, themselves, or take care of themselves, like a very broad message around reproductive freedom. Anyways, a really good question from Mary Wisman. Sorry, Mary, if I'm pronouncing that wrong. Are you making any use of social pressure messaging? And then we got to talk about voters abroad before we wrap, because a lot of people are excited about that. Social pressure messaging.
Yasmin, I feel like this might be a me question.
Yeah, go ahead. No, I'll talk more broadly about this. Go ahead.
Okay, cool. Social pressure messaging. So basically, this is a bit of a term of art. So if you're not familiar with this, social pressure messaging is this idea that you are motivating people by reminding them of some sort of norm that is shared, often by people who they would consider to be, say, part of their in-group. So something like, 80% of your neighbors vote. Did you vote? Or something that reminds you that there's surveillance going on, like the language I mentioned about who you vote for is private, but whether or not you vote is public, reminds the recipient, oh, right, like there's this expectation of voting and somebody might be like looking up my voting record. And it just reminds them that voting is this socially normative act. There's been quite a bit of research on this. And in a lot of like direct mail, folks will use this approach. We tend to not go in that. We don't think of social pressure in our context quite the same way. And the reason is because these letters, again, are meant to come off as very authentic and coming from a particular person. It's really like a personal contact. It's almost like a quasi-relational tactic, the way I think of it. It's not quite as relational as actually being contacted by, say, your friend or your family member, but it's trending in that direction. And when you think about those conversations that, say, you have with a friend, right? Your friend isn't going to come up to you and say, like, hey, like all of us are voting, so you should too. They're not going to try and peer pressure you, hopefully. And they're not going to say something like, hey, did you know that who you vote for is private, but whether or not you vote is public? You'd say like, friend, why are you checking up on me? That's kind of creepy, right? So we think of the sort of social pressure angle in a softer way. It's more like, you are receiving a letter that reminds you that somebody else cares about voting and does vote, right? The message says, I vote because. And so that's a way of activating that sort of connection to the norm of voting without being quite so heavy-handed, and maybe doing it in a more sort of personal, authentic way.
Yeah, I'll just, as on an anecdotal side to the great example that Emily lifted about how this is actually very intuitive, and the research does show exactly what Emily's saying pretty intuitively. There have been really successful social pressure campaigns and this is speaking broadly, not just at Vote Forward, there have also been a lot of backlash effects. I think most famously, Ted Cruz's social pressure in the 2016 primary was very well reported. But even within the sort of progressive ecosystem, as Emily said, there is a real sweet spot around social pressure, and some folks have crossed over that line. So anyway, for folks who are interested in sort of nerding out over over more of that, there's some great, pretty dense but exciting reading on the Analyst Institute website, where you can see both positive and negative social pressure campaigns sort of outside the Vote Forward orbit that may satiate your curiosity.
And then last but not least, we'd love to hear a little bit more about your writing letters to voters abroad. We have a lot of folks from Dems Abroad come to Big Tent. One of the questions which was asked, which I thought was great, was are you going to be doing a second batch of letters to those folks, since they get so little contact and it is so tricky to vote from abroad?
Yes, this is such a great question, because we are in fact planning to do that. So the folks who vote from abroad need to request their absentee ballots early in the year. And then once they receive those ballots at their overseas address, of course, they need to actually fill them out and send them back. And so later in the year, once we get closer to the election, and we think that these folks have already gotten their ballots, they've already requested them, we will be planning on following up again to make sure that they actually go ahead and do the thing that they said they were going to do.
Yeah, great. Well, we're looking forward to that. So please let us know when those letters launch so that we can share them with our community. Again, I just want to say thank you to two terrific women. It was great to spend more time with the folks at Vote Forward. We're really so proud to be partnering with you and look forward to the work ahead. We are definitely going to reach our 100,000 letter goal and then some. And we will be following you guys and what you're doing, but we really appreciate your time, effort, and all that you're doing for the voters of America and for our election outcomes in 2024. So Emily and Yasmin, thanks for coming to Big Tent. We'll see you soon, I hope.
Thank you, Kitty. Big thanks to Bree for organizing a lot of the behind the scenes here. And of course, Tracy for inspiring us on how to do some great letter writing parties. And really just want to thank everybody for your really, really great questions. You're going to be getting information from Kitty about how you can reach us. I know we didn't have time to get into every single question, but the curiosity that you all are showing here is so we relate to it so much in the Vote Forward community of not just taking action, but really making sure that action is impactful. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And we look forward to being in touch.
Great. Bye, everyone. Thanks for coming to Big Tent.